Anyway, I'm the entertainment for today. My name is Greene. I'm the forensic accountant. Thank you, Joy, for all the plugs, even my friend Tim as well. Although my practice area is a little bit different, I don't really get involved that much in divorce cases. Years ago I did them, and I will tell you that Joy is certainly one of the very renowned experts, and certainly if bad things happen to you, this is the lady you want to talk to. I remember that from my old days doing some divorce practice. But for about the last 20 years or so, what I've been specializing in is really more the employee theft, internal theft, and different types of fraud matters. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about this morning. I belong to a group called the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. It's the largest organization of accountants, investigators that are dedicated to investigating fraud in the world. And about every other year, they come out with a study. It's called a Report to the Nation, where they do the largest study of what we call occupational fraud in the world. And they survey people like myself and try to figure out what's the trend and the types of frauds that you're seeing out there. What are some things that we can do to stop those frauds? What sorts of controls should we have in place? And take a look at who the perpetrators are. So what I wanted to do this morning was spend a little bit of time with you and kind of profile with you what to look for within your business in case you have a thief within, okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the more common frauds that we see out there, and then finally give you a couple ideas of things that you want to make sure that you do to stop fraud from occurring within your business. First and foremost, in terms of the report to the nation, I've got a pass out. Hopefully you're taking a look at that. I apologize, I should have brought the PowerPoint. I wasn't thinking, I should have put it on a little disc or what have you and brought it. But I'm just going to hit a couple of the more popular things. If you can turn to the second page. This is kind of interesting, but I think it makes some sense. Who do you think commits the most fraud within organizations? Think about it. What department? What position? Accountants, duh. Okay, right? They're the folks with the money, okay? So if you actually look at the statistics that have been done by the CFE organization over the past number of years, about a third of the frauds are done by folks that work within an accounting or finance function, okay? That's one of the major findings. So you've got to be very, very careful there who you're hiring. And why that's so important is what Melanie was pointing out, and I think it's good to have somebody like Melanie on your team because often what you might be doing is hiring the wrong person, okay? Now, the association has found consistently that most of the people that get caught in these frauds have no prior backgrounds. I'm here to tell you that most of the cases we do are just the opposite. That, in fact, the people that we're investigating for committing crime within organizations or within companies actually have had a previous history of criminal activity, okay? And what has happened is nobody's done the background check. And had they simply done a background check, they would have found this problem. And just to give you some very, very quick cases, we did one about 2 years ago. Jim Scordo, for those of you who know, back, I know he's very active in the organization back there, worked on this one. But it was a large publicly traded company here in Chicago. The guy was director of MIS, okay? He embezzled over $3 million from the company by stealing basically IT equipment. What happened was they never did a background check. But we started looking at his resume. We did a little background check, and we found out that he claimed that he had graduated from Ohio State University with a degree in in computer science. The truth of the matter was, they hired him out of the Ohio Correctional Facility, okay, where he had been spending a number of years. He had actually portrayed himself as a doctor. He did identity fraud at Ohio State University Hospital, okay, where he wore a lab coat with his real name stitched on it, okay, and he portrayed himself as a doctor so he could steal equipment from Ohio, OSU's, the Ohio State University, I think it's called today, but their hospital. That's the whole point of it. So, right out of prison, they hired this guy, and here we are 20 years later, and he's back to his old tricks, okay? We've had a number of cases involving small businesses. The other thing that the association has found is that small businesses really take on a disproportional brunt of fraud. Why? Well, because you don't have as many controls in place, right? You don't have as many people keeping an eye on folks. And as a result, a lot of times small businesses get into trouble. And we've had a number of those cases where people actually have hired, people literally out of jail. We actually did some work years ago with a law firm, small law firm here in the Chicago area, where the bookkeeper embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what she did was, although she couldn't sign checks, they allowed her to do the electronic banking. Okay? If you use QuickBooks and things like that, it's nice to be able to hook on to electronic banking so you can do your reconciliation. The problem was that also gave her access to the ability to do wire transfers. So what she did was she began to wire transfer funds out of the firm's account. And of course she covered it up in the accounting records and so forth. When it was finally discovered, we did a background check. And sure enough, she had spent time in DuPage County at the local jail for embezzlement from her previous employer, who actually was her father. Her father owned the company, and she had stolen from him. So, I mean, I can tell you story after story. We had another one where, accounts payable clerk, nobody could find her. She's sitting in Gwinnett County Jail. Why? Because she was a felon from a previous embezzlement. So, enough of that. So, preaching the importance of doing background checks. A couple of things to be careful about. Going to the next page. A lot of these frauds, a lot of people think they're hard, it's rocket science, whatever. It really isn't. A lot of the cases that we work on afterwards, it's more of like, duh, okay? Duh. The biggest thing that we see is people living beyond their means. If you just open up and look and see what people are doing, a lot of times you can tell that fraud's going on. One of the things that we always talk about is doing what's called a parking lot audit. We go out and see what people drive, okay? And often that might give you an idea that something's wrong within your organization. Years ago I did a lot of work in the steel industry, both S-T-E-E-L and S-T-E-A-L, okay? And we had a vice president, his admin, okay, suddenly shows up in a brand new Jaguar. And everybody, remember when Ford bought it, it was Jaguar? And what happened was everybody's wondering, how could she afford that? Okay? Later on, what we discovered, because we were actually investigating her boss on a different matter, we discovered that he had given her his passcode and his security code for the accounting system. So she was able to get into this very large, multi-billion-dollar company's accounting system and write herself expense checks to the tune of about $6,000 a month, thus the Jaguar. So a lot of times it's just simply, if you open your eyes, you'll see it right in front of you. Many years ago, one of my favorite cases is we had a tax accountant for a small subsidiary of a huge company here in the Chicago area. It was a very small, more like family-oriented company. And I love this guy because he had the best fraud of all. Now think about this. If you're a tax accountant, how would you steal from a company? Anyone? Any ideas?
Yeah, tax refund.
What he did was that he created a fictitious tax, one that the company didn't know. And then he told the company they had to pay it. And of course they believed him because he was the tax accountant. So every week they would issue him a check for $7,500. Do the math. Every week, 52 weeks, minimum of 8 years. We think it was more like 28 years, but that's a different story. But that's what proof we had was 8 years. Okay. And the man never made more than $65,000 a year. But yet he comes to work in a vehicle that costs more than his annual salary. He lives in a multi-million-dollar North Shore home, and everybody knows where he lives, and nobody questioned how the tax accountant could afford to live there. True story. He embezzled over $4.8 million eventually is what we found. All right, very quickly, why do they do that? There's a criminologist, and for those of you that see these initials, MCJ, I actually went back to graduate school after I put my kids through college because I missed paying tuition, and got a master's in criminal justice. But there's these criminologists that have all these theories, one of which is a fellow by the name of Donald Cressy, and he has a theory over embezzlement. He talks about something called the fraud triangle. And what Cressy said was, look, 3 things come together to cause people to steal. And here's the problem. We're seeing it right now. The 3 things are, first of all, you have to have a non-shareable financial pressure, okay? In other words, you as an employee, you need money and you can't get it for traditional means. Are we in a bad times? Absolutely. Bad economy, could this put pressure on people? Absolutely, okay? These are, as we know, some of the worst of times economically. People have lost their jobs, lost their overtime, lost their bonuses, blah, 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 had a lot of debt. You know the stories. So the point is that people that have this non-shareable financial pressure, okay, then that's their motive, and then they have opportunity, because what happens today is that in order to reduce costs, a lot of the controls are taken away, so people aren't watching what's going on, okay? So they've got opportunity because now they can get in the books and records or what have you. And the third thing is rationalization. Yeah, every criminal will rationalize their act. They're not paying me enough, I deserve it, look how many years I put with the company, blah, 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 okay? And that's often why these folks steal. I know I'm kind of running out of time. Here's some things to look for. This is important. Go to page 3. I've got these things, what to look for. Number 1, unexplainable wealth. Or you'll hear stories that are just unbelievable. Most of the stories I would hear is that somehow there was a mob connection, okay? That was to scare you away. I'd actually heard that the tax accountant had married into the mob. That was his excuse. I had a vice president we went after years ago. The excuse was his father was the largest bookie in St. Louis. I had another one up in Detroit. His story was he was supposedly a hitman for the mob, even though he worked in a factory. I was like, that's amazing. But in any event, you'll hear those sorts of things. But unexplainable wealth. In other words, these folks often show and display the wealth. They're living way beyond their means. Large homes, things like that. Refusal to take promotion. That's called they can't take the cut and pay. My fellow who was a tax accountant, they wanted to make him CFO. He would have gone from $65,000 a year to $120,000 a year. No way in hell, heck, does he want that job, right? He was stealing $600,000 a year as a tax accountant. Why would I take a cut and pay? So, those people that refuse to take a promotion are the ones to be careful of. Refusal to take time off. That's a big one as well, okay? Fraud takes a lot of work. And as a result, people will get nervous that they're going to get caught, okay? So they don't want to take time off. They want to be able to control the situation. So one of the things we always tell people to look for is look for the people that have the least amount of vacation time, personal time, sick time, whatever. Those are the ones to look for. You're kind of learning that your best employees are your crooks, right? Got it? Okay. Refusal to take time off. Unusual hours. Again, fraud takes a lot of work, so it's not unusual that fraudsters will stay later to mask the records. Okay. They'll come in on weekends to falsify records. We've had that happen. Okay. Doing jobs below their position. They don't want to be caught. Years ago, I investigated a managing partner for one of the largest law firms here in Chicago for embezzlement many, many years ago. What was interesting was, here's a managing partner of a large law firm. At the time, they had 500 attorneys. Today, they're much bigger. And he was the only partner that actually did his own expense report. All the rest of them, their admins did it. Why did he do his? Because he was stealing from them. Okay? Addictive behaviors. The other thing we find is fraudsters, often with pressure, they'll have a lot of addictive behaviors, drinking, gambling, things like that. Let me tell you a couple. I've got, again, these slides might be helpful to you. I'll be around, but let me tell you a couple of things to be careful of these days. It's stuff that we see normally out there that affects small businesses. Joy mentioned QuickBooks, which is a phenomenal accounting system. Okay, we use it. A lot of small businesses use it. The problem with QuickBooks is there's a weakness in it that you have to understand. What I can do is I can sit there and write a check to Craig Greene, okay? And I can go ahead and cash that check. I can go back into QuickBooks and I will edit that check and instead make it Acme Industries, okay? And every document that's produced thereafter will always show Acme Industries. Unless you actually look at the check, you'll never realize it was written to Craig Greene. Now, I'll give you a secret that most people don't know. There's actually an audit. You have to know where to look. But there's an audit log within QuickBooks where you can find that they've changed names. I have a case. I do a lot of work out in Las Vegas. We have offices in Vegas, Chicago, and Atlanta. But we have a case in Vegas right now where the bookkeeper, that's what she did. And we were able to go back in the audit log and find all the checks where she changed it from her name into the name of the vendor, so that when you look at the accounting records, it appears to be a business expense when in fact it was a check to her. Be careful of those, okay? Be careful, like I said, about giving rights to your bookkeeper to do electronic banking, because with that, they can actually do wire transfers, which allows them to get money out of your account. Another one that's popular to look for is, a lot of us pay our credit cards online, right? You go online and pay your credit card, your American Express, your Visa. If you notice, on most of those things, they won't ask the name of what the account name is. So what we'll have is we'll have bookkeepers or accountants that will pay their credit cards using the account number and routing number, okay, of the company. And if nobody complains, it goes through, okay? Because unless somebody says anything, and they can cover it up in the books and records, it will continue to go through. The last thing to be careful about is something we call lapping. And what lapping is where they steal customer payments and they apply other customer checks against accounts. If you ever happen to walk in and your bookkeeper, your accounting department seems to have a lot of unprocessed checks, that's a big red flag of a lapping scheme, okay? So they're waiting to figure out how to apply them.